and she ended up completely alone and unprotected in a tunnel in Paris in the middle of the night. A 16-year-old boy said those words, and then he sealed them back up inside himself, and he carried them for the next 25 years. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily and stay ahead of every royal development. But William was not the only one inside this family carrying something connected to Camilla. There was someone else. Princess Anne. Her wound was far older than Diana's. Her history with Camilla stretched back 50 years. Before Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, Andrew Parker Bowles was in a serious relationship with Princess Anne. They were close enough that marriage had been discussed between them. But the royal family shut it down completely. She had no say in it. She stepped aside because there was no other option available to her. And within a very short time after Anne stepped aside, Camilla moved in. Andrew proposed to Camilla. And in 1973, Princess Anne put on her formal clothes and sat in the church pews and watched the entire wedding happen in front of her eyes. She could not stay home. A senior royal does not miss a wedding in their social circle without it becoming a public story of its own. So she went, and she watched Camilla walk down the aisle toward the man Anne had believed she had a future with. Anne was not a woman who cried in front of people. She had been raised from childhood to hold her face perfectly still in public, no matter what was happening inside her. So she sat there in those pews with her face completely still, and she watched every single moment of that wedding. People who knew Anne well during that period say she had a particular way of handling pain. She did not collapse under it. She converted it. She pressed everything she felt down into something cold and hard and permanent. And she carried it. And then the woman who had walked down that aisle spent the next several decades as the secret mistress who wrecked her brother's marriage, ground Diana down until there was almost nothing left, and eventually walked into Buckingham Palace with a crown on her head. Royal author Penny Junor reported that Camilla was genuinely intimidated by Anne for years, that Anne's cold manner toward her was deeply unsettling, that the issues sitting between them had never once been resolved and never would be. After the 2023 coronation, there are reports that Anne walked up to Camilla at a private luncheon, looked her directly in the eye, and said, "You are not the queen. You are just the king's wife." So when Anne stood in the Hall of Matriarchs, that evening with her hand on Diana's frame, she was there because this moment belonged to her just as much as it belonged to William. Hit that like button and subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. The night before it happened, William sat alone in his private study and made one phone call. He called Princess Anne. When she picked up, he did not waste time. He said, "She comes home tomorrow." Anne did not pause for even a second. She said, "I cannot wait to see the look on her face. It is long overdue. Diana deserves to come home." The call ended there. Neither of them needed another word. And across London that same night, Camilla climbed into bed with no idea that conversation had just taken place. What Camilla did not know, what almost no one outside a tiny and carefully chosen circle of people knew, was that William had not simply woken up one day and decided to do this. He had sat in private meetings with palace curators about portrait placement rules. He had gone through the historical records of every portrait placement that had ever taken place inside the royal residences going back decades. He made sure that every single rule was followed to the exact letter. He needed it done so correctly and so cleanly that no one on earth, not Camilla, not her lawyers, not any palace official, could ever touch it afterward. The morning of the day it happened, William's team had arranged for Camilla to have a public engagement outside London. The only purpose was to get her out of the building and hold her away until Diana's portrait was on the wall and completely beyond anyone's reach. She left that morning without the slightest suspicion. The Hall of Matriarchs was sealed off. Only a small number of personally vetted staff members were allowed inside. Nothing was placed on the official royal diary that day. No press release existed anywhere. This was happening in total silence. In the early evening, the portrait of Princess Diana was carried into the Hall of Matriarchs. It had been wrapped up and sitting in that storage room where Camilla had thrown it for over 20 years. The staff members who carried it moved carefully and slowly, the way people move when they are carrying something that has been hurt and that deserves finally to be treated with gentleness. Princess Anne was already in the room when they arrived. She had insisted on being there herself. She had waited far too long to let another person stand in her place for this moment. When Diana's face came back into the light, the air in that gallery shifted. Nobody made a sound, and Princess Anne, who had been standing a few feet back watching every step, moved forward. She stood in front of the portrait and looked at it for a long time without saying anything. And then she reached out and placed one hand on the edge of the frame and straightened it just very slightly. The way you correct something that has been sitting wrong for far too long. Within 90 minutes of the portrait arriving in that gallery, Diana's face was on the wall, placed directly beside the late Queen Elizabeth. Two women side by side on the most honored wall in the royal residence. One who reigned for 70 years. One who never had the chance to reign at all. Everyone stood there and looked at it. And then Princess Anne said something quietly, almost to herself. But the staff member standing nearby heard every word. She said, "Diana belongs here. She always did." Royal Report Daily, bringing you the truth behind every royal headline. That evening, Camilla returned from her engagement in London. She had no idea what had happened inside Windsor while she was gone. She got ready for bed. She went to sleep. And in the Hall of Matriarchs, in the building she believed she had fully secured for herself, Diana looked out from the wall beside the Queen. The next morning, Camilla walked into the corridor the way she walked into every corridor inside Windsor, relaxed and unhurried. She looked up, and Diana was on the wall, in the exact spot that had been empty for 25 years. Camilla stopped walking. Her body stopped completely, mid-stride, as if something had cut the signal between her brain and her legs. Sources close to the palace say she stood in front of that portrait for close to a full minute without making a sound. Then she started making calls. She demanded the portrait be taken down from the wall immediately. The answer that came back was no. She demanded an emergency meeting with William face to face. The answer that came back was no. She went to Charles. She walked into the room where he was, and she stood in front of him, and she told him to fix it. She told him to make a call. She told him to do the thing he had done for her 100 times over 30 years, which was stand between her and whatever was coming. She waited for him to be the man he had always been for her without exception. He looked at her, and he said nothing. She demanded a full explanation from every single member of palace staff who had been involved in the restoration. The answer that came back was no. Every demand, every call, every direction she turned. No, no, no. For the first time in her entire life as a member of this royal family, Camilla had no power at all inside her own home. And in that silence, Camilla finally understood something she had been refusing to face for 30 years. She had never been the choice. She had always been the compromise. And the man sitting across from her had just, for the first time in his life, chosen his son over her. Chosen Diana's memory over her. Chosen the institution he had spent 30 years breaking for her sake. Over the woman he had broken it for. Just then, Princess Anne walked in. Anne looked at Camilla with complete stillness. The stillness of a woman who had been waiting 50 years for this exact moment and felt absolutely no need to rush a single second of it. And she said 5 words. "It is what Diana deserved." She did not wait for Camilla to respond. She turned around and walked out of the room. And Camilla stood there in the silence Anne left behind her, completely alone. Don't miss a single update. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Diana's portrait is on that wall now, right beside Queen Elizabeth, the two women who gave the modern British monarchy its emotional heart, finally side by side in the place they always belonged. And there is nothing Camilla can do about it. Nothing Charles can say. Nothing any aide or official or lawyer can file or challenge. William made sure of that 20 years ago, when he started quietly learning every single rule specifically so this moment could never be undone. This has been Royal Report Daily, bringing you the complete truth from inside the palace walls. If this story moved you, if this is the moment you have been waiting to hear about, please hit that like button right now. Something shocking just happened inside Windsor Castle that royal commentators have been waiting 25 years to see. William finally acted. He went straight to the dark storage room where Camilla had hidden Princess Diana's official portrait, pulled it out, and placed it exactly where it belongs. Right beside Queen Elizabeth on the Hall of Matriarchs wall. When Camilla saw it, she lost complete control. Staff who were present say they had never seen her that furious. She went straight to Charles and demanded he rip it off that wall immediately. What Charles did next turned the entire palace upside down, and nobody inside those walls saw it coming. Welcome to Royal Report Daily, your most trusted source for breaking royal news and exclusive investigations. Tonight we are covering the moment 25 years in the making, the moment a son kept his promise to his mother, and the moment the palace's most carefully buried secret finally came into the light. Don't forget to subscribe to Royal Report Daily and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single update. There is a painting of Princess Diana that most people have never seen. And the moment you hear where that painting has been sitting for the last 25 years, it will break your heart. The artist finished it during one of the most extraordinary periods of Diana's life. She was at the peak of everything she was, her beauty, her warmth, her grace. When the artist finally stepped back and told her it was done, Diana walked up to it slowly. According to those present, she stood in front of it and she did not say a single word for a long time. And then her eyes filled with tears. She did not let them fall. She forced them back. Then she turned to the artist, took both of their hands in hers and kissed them. Just like that. Just a woman so moved by what she saw that she did not know what else to do with the feeling. That portrait was meant to hang in the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor Castle, a wall reserved for the most important women in the entire history of the British monarchy. Diana had earned her place on that wall, but she never made it there. She died before it happened, and the moment Camilla had the power to make it right, she did the exact opposite. She grabbed that portrait herself. She carried it down the corridor with her own hands and shoved it into a dark, dusty storage room where nobody would ever see it again. When a staff member stepped forward and offered to carry it, Camilla turned around and humiliated them so badly in front of everyone that they quietly stepped back and never said another word. She wanted this moment for herself. And as she walked out of that storage room and pulled the door shut behind her, staff members who were there said she was smiling. Not uncomfortably. Smiling like she had just won something she had been waiting a very long time to collect. Stay tuned to Royal Report Daily. We bring you the stories that matter. But before Camilla ever got to enter Diana's space and take down her portrait, she had already been doing something cruel for years. She had been mocking her. Every morning at her estate in Wiltshire, Camilla would sit down with her cup of tea and her morning papers. And throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, those same papers were tearing Princess Diana apart on an almost daily basis. And they had plenty of material to work with. Because behind the palace walls, Diana was fighting battles that nobody around her was willing to help her fight. Her marriage to Charles had already collapsed from the inside. Charles was barely present, cold toward her in private and indifferent in public. Diana had developed bulimia, an eating disorder quietly destroying her body while she was expected to smile and wave and perform at every public engagement. She was struggling with depression so severe there were days she could barely function. She had tried to speak to people inside the palace about what she was going through. She had asked for help. She was told to pull herself together. So the pain kept building with nowhere to go, and sometimes it came out in public. A tremble in her voice at an engagement. Tears she could not hold back at the wrong moment. A fragility that cameras caught and newspapers seized on immediately. They called her hysterical. They called her unstable. They wrote that she was too fragile, too emotional, too simple for royal life. And on the mornings when the tabloids ran something especially savage, something about her shrinking frame or her mental state or her tears at a public event, Camilla would pick the paper up and read the piece out loud at the table and reach for her tea. And those present would laugh. Her circle of friends, people from old aristocratic families who had always looked at Diana as fundamentally out of place, would laugh right along with her. Inside that same circle, Diana had nicknames. The gentle one was the Mouse. Others called her Bambi, all wobble and no backbone. But the cruelest one, the one used most freely, the one that eventually found its way back to Diana herself, was the Clothes Horse. Basically a thing to hang fabric on, a prop. Camilla never once told anyone in her presence to stop using these names. She never corrected a single person. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to Royal Report Daily for more exclusive investigations. And then there was something even more painful. Diana stood 5 feet 10 inches tall. When she wore heels, which she almost always did at public engagements, she was visibly taller than Charles in every photograph. So she started doing something. Before every camera clicked, she would bend her knees just slightly. She would shift one hip down. She would make herself physically smaller just so the man beside her would not look shorter, just so she would not be the one blamed for it. The British press tore into her for it anyway. One piece described her as a woman who did not know what to do with her own body. Camilla, who stood naturally beside Charles without adjusting a single thing, reportedly found this particular part of Diana's life quietly hilarious. There is one account that has never been confirmed and never been denied. At a formal dinner, someone in the room used the name Clothes Horse out loud while Diana was standing close enough to hear it. The room went still. Diana smiled. She kept her face completely composed and moved on through the room the way she always did, because she had spent years learning how to absorb a blow in public without flinching. But one of her private staff members who was there that evening later told a close friend what happened when Diana got back to her own rooms later that night. She walked in. She sat down on the edge of her bed and did not move for a very long time. Her staff member stood nearby and watched her, and later said that the stillness was almost harder to witness than tears would have been, because tears would have meant it was coming out. That stillness meant Diana was pushing it somewhere deep inside herself, the way she had been pushing things for years. Don't miss a single update. Subscribe to Royal Report Daily right now. Diana died in Paris in August 1997. And within hours of her death, being confirmed, before most of the British public had even been told, that their princess was gone, the phones inside the palace were already ringing. And the calls being made in those first hours were about jewelry. Specifically, which pieces of crown jewelry had traveled to Paris with Diana. Which pieces needed to come back to the palace immediately. A royal aide was sent. A man boarded a plane to Paris while Diana's body was still lying in a hospital room, to go through her belongings and make sure the right items were secured before anyone had the chance to ask difficult questions. That was the very first official act that took place inside the palace after Princess Diana died. And while that was happening, Camilla was already moving through the palace. Diana had kept fresh flowers in the rooms she lived in throughout the palace. After Camilla moved in, she ordered them burned. Someone had to physically carry Diana's flowers out of those rooms. Someone had to follow that order all the way through to the end. And those flowers were burned. The bedroom where Diana had slept. The room where she had pulled her boys into bed with her on hard mornings and cried alone at night. Camilla had that room locked permanently. She did not want to sleep there herself, but she made absolutely certain nobody else would ever sleep there either. She wanted it sealed like a room that held something shameful, shut away, forgotten. Diana's belongings were boxed up and removed. Her photographs were pulled down from ceremonial spaces across the royal residences. And the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor, that sacred wall, never received Diana's portrait. Because even after Diana was dead, Camilla found her presence on a wall threatening. William was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. He already knew everything. Diana had sat him down herself and told him. She told him there had been 3 people in their marriage. He watched Camilla walk through his mother's rooms. He watched his mother's pictures come down from the walls. He kept his face perfectly still every time anyone was watching, but the rage was burning him from the inside out. At 16, he finally broke open. He pulled a close friend aside and said everything he had been holding. He said Camilla had dug her claws into his father and never let go for a single second. He said that was why his mother was dead, because Diana had been driven out of her own family, stripped of every layer of protection she had, pushed further and further toward the edges until there was nobody left around her.